Welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Alicia and I am going to be talking to everyone about our build assembly process in QuickBooks Enterprise. I am really excited about this one today. I hope that I am teaching everyone something that they don't know about assemblies and inventory manufacturing, all of those things. It's definitely one of my favorite topics. So let's go ahead and get started. Build assembly process. I had so many things I wanted to put on this slide, but I was like, nope, let's keep it simple because there's a lot of uniques about build assemblies, and there's so many different industries that this process can help. A lot of times people think, it can only be one or the other, or I have to use assemblies, and sometimes that really isn't the case. So we're going to touch on assemblies versus groups, sub-assemblies. Sometimes you also hear that as nested assemblies. Pending builds. Why is that even important? Why do I want to know what a pending build is? And then the accounting entries behind it. A lot of times people ask me about, well, I need to see my WIP. I need to see this. I need this balance sheet. I need this account. And so we're going to talk about that. Finished goods, kind of what does that look like on the accounting side, raw materials, and really what does this assembly process do on the back end of accounting. Okay, so I'm gonna dive right into our QuickBooks Enterprise. And so I do have a quick question already. Can you void or delete a build after it's already been saved? That is a really good question. And so one of the things that you'll kind of hear if you are one of my clients, I never recommend deleting anything. If we can void a transaction, that would be something that we would want to do. However, in this situation, there's a lot of, well, if this scenarios. And so if we've already used the finished good inventory from that build, we potentially may not want to do that, to void it or delete it. And so it really would need to be something that we would look at as a situation. If I needed to make an adjusting entry or adjustment to that build, something that we could do, but I think it does make a difference of, if I did something and I want to fix it and put it back versus I didn't need to do this, right? So those are some things that you got to think through before we make any changes like that. Okay, so I'm going to start out on our item list, and you may have kind of heard or seen this item list. There's a lot of YouTube videos that we have out there that is going to talk about the item list and item type setup and structure in more detail than I'm going to go into today. And just a quick reminder, so I am using QuickBooks Enterprise 2024. It's the latest version that is out and available. And that is what I'm using a sample file of. So I believe I had another question on that one. Okay, so going to our item list, I want to make sure I've got a sample file. It's got all kinds of items already set up. I want to kind of just show our inventory assembly item and some of the things that we would need to do before we can just go build an assembly, right? And so our foundation starts with making sure that our inventory assembly item has the right components in it, our bill of materials is set up properly. And so I want to show this bill of materials. So as you look through and you see on our bill of materials here, I've got some item types that are not inventory parts. And so how do I get those items to be able to be allowed on this bill of materials? So I want to double click our labor item, and I want to show you the magic trick. So if you can all see my cursor in this box with this check mark, that is the magic trick that allows us to add these items that are non-inventory parts or assemblies to the bill of materials. And so what this does is it allows for the second kind of purchase information to be available at that item level. Okay, so if I am doing anything with service or other charges or non-inventory parts, and they are part of my manufacturing process, I want to ensure that I check the box that this service or non-inventory or this item is used in assemblies, and that way we can add it to our bill of materials, okay? All right, so now that I've found this little trick, now we can kind of talk about what we do on our bill of materials. So for a lot of my clients, I will basically kind of talk about when we are setting up this bill of materials list. This is for a quantity of one of whatever we are building. So an example, I have a client that does gumdrops. And so the gumdrops, right, we actually manufacture in a batch, but it's ingredients. So it's almost as if we're baking a cake or making cookies. And so my ingredients that I put in here, it's going to be for one cake, one cookie, maybe it's a dozen of cookies, right? But it equals one batch, okay? So if that kind of helps make sense of how I'm doing this, if I am manufacturing like chips or coffee, right? So it's one batch, and that is what you want to put in here to build a quantity of one. Now, when we go to our build assembly process, we're going to be able to talk about making modifications and adjustments and those things. But building that quantity of one, that's what you want to do for that bill of materials. And then we'll multiply, let the build of assembly transactions multiply all the things for us, okay? So this is also going to be what is our standard. And if our standard can also change in our manufacturing process, in QuickBooks Enterprise, we have the ability to have real-time inventory and update what is reality, what happened in the real world on the assembly screen. So we've got our items set up. I do want to make sure that I touch on what sub-assemblies and nested assemblies would look like. So this sample file doesn't have any sub-assemblies in here, but let's just say if I had this 2000 PT as a sub-assembly of this 1000 MC item, right, then I would have that assembly added to the bill of materials here. Okay, so a really good example, I have a IndyCar manufacturer client that I've worked with, and they had multiple sub-assemblies or nested assemblies. And an example of that, right, the motor. That motor has a lot of different components. All of those components make up one assembly. Just call it motor, right? Then we've got the body. We've got the brake pads. We've got the steering column. Think about all those things. Those have to be built in order to then build the final Indy car that they're going to be selling to their clients, right? And so all of these different sub-assemblies are built at different times and then put together, that would make our finished good. And so you can have multiple sub-assemblies added to our bill of materials if that is what our real world workflow requires, okay? So again, our sub-assemblies can be added right here. You would just need to set up all of your item list first and then come in and set up your final bill of materials. So sub-assemblies have to be added, then you could do the finished good, okay? All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and talk about like the groups versus the assemblies real fast. So if we noticed on this assembly, right, we have general ledger accounts that this item is going to. Group items do not have GL accounts. So assemblies are going to be moving raw material at the quantity and the value of an item to an finished good item, and that will have a quantity and a value. It will hit the GL, right? If you add it to an invoice, it will hit the GL, and I can run reports off of that item, the assembly item. In this group, there are no reports I can run because this group item does not hit the GL, okay? So that's a big, quick difference on assemblies and groups. All right, so now I've got my inventory assembly items set up. I am ready to go. And so I wanna go back to our homepage real fast and kind of talk about, you know, where do I put these items? So assemblies can be put on estimates and they can be put on sales orders to identify our demand for that finished good and the raw materials. And so that also comes into play when we're kind of doing supply and demand and ensuring that we've got enough inventory, for example, on our stock status by item report, right? For our assemblies, if we needed those, right? The raw material and this for assemblies line, that's what that is for, okay? And so this is something where when we put this in our workflow and we put this on the right transactions, it'll allow for us to have the right data so we're ordering to fulfill for real-time inventory, okay? All right, so I do want to go to our build assembly, okay? This build assembly transaction has already been recorded, right? So it's a final build assembly. How do I know the difference between a pending build and a final build? Oh, it's a very good question. So our build assembly here is marked as pending. So a pending build, why in the world would we do that, right? So if we aren't using pending builds and we're trying to figure out, well, how do I know what to order and my, you know, like purchasing and all that, and that stock status report that I just showed you. So one of the things that I kind of teach my clients and actually implemented when I was a former controller was when we have our order, our sales order put in place, then we need to be able to let our warehouse, right, our guys, our manufacturers, know what to go build, right? And so this 2000 PT is something that we've got demand for. So now we're going to go put our build in, but we need to mark it as pending. And so how we do that and why we do that is so that we then can ensure that we're ordering the right product and that we're able to even identify when this is needed in our manufacturing process, right? So if I have my demand today, I can go out and say, I know that production isn't going to build this until next week. And so I can schedule this to be built when it is needed, right? Or when it's going to run through our manufacturing, okay? Lots of things that we can do here. So I'm putting in my 1000 PT. I'm going to select my warehouse because this sample file has all kinds of stuff turned on. So now that I've done this, right, what do I need to do next? So remember, QuickBooks is time and date stamped. So I did talk about in my sample file here, it's in the future, but I did talk about I can schedule this for the date I want it to be run in the real world, correct? So I can put this to a future date. If I do that, I have to remember that it is date and timestamp. So I may not have enough inventory on hand today to build, right? So if I don't, that is okay. We know that we're going to go through the ordering process. We're going to receive our inventory. Then when it's actually built, then I'll remove it, okay? So this date is important. It's also important to remember when we're running reports, what we need to look at or dates to include as well. Okay, so down here at the bottom, I've got our maximum number that I can build from the quantity on hand of the raw components that are already here. I can only build 11 of these. So if I go to say I want to build 15 in my quantity to build box, what happens is I get a pop-up box that says, whoa, 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 you do not have enough inventory on hand to build 15, okay? And so it'll basically say you've got to mark as pending, right? And now this is how I've made it pending, okay? If I don't make it pending like this, I can always go edit and then, let me clear. Let me do that again. Let me show you the things. Okay, put 15. Okay, so I can come over here and say mark as pending, just like if I have it pending, I can also go edit mark as final once I have enough inventory on hand. So pending bills, they are non-financial posting transactions, okay? I want to make sure that everyone understands that because they are non-financial posting transactions. So once I've got this pending build in, it's basically allowing me to see on my inventory stock status by item report which raw material is needed if I don't have enough on hand, okay? So if I go to build and close this, it has now marked that build assembly as pending, and I can go to my inventory pending builds report, and this pending builds report is going to show all of the pending builds on their dates that I have scheduled out here to be built, okay? Let's just say that I am now ready to go build these 15, right? If I'm ready to go build this 15, and what happens if for some reason, as I'm going through this, that IndyCar manufacturer, what happens if, instead of using like 4 washers that the bill of material called for, I accidentally dropped a washer and I got 5. And so I really want those 5 washers to be pulled out of my inventory for real time versus, right, just using the 4 that was on there, right? And so scrap any kind of like damaged products, anything like that that's happened. If we're doing a cake baker and I accidentally spill some flour, right? Those are things that I will be able to incorporate into this build assembly, right, to get real-time updated inventory, okay? So for example, this drum here, it's calling for 330, but what if I use 335? I can actually come in and make those changes and updates, and the system is going to pull the right amount of raw material out and the dollar value and help me move that to the true finished good, okay? So this is definitely something that we want to incorporate into our workflows. And then the other thing that we want to make sure is what happens on this wire nut, for example, it's calling for orange, but let's just say I used yellow, okay? So if I use the yellow, it is going to allow for me to make that change. I can update the quantity that needs to be used here. Okay. So let's just say that I used two each on the 15 that I built. Okay, so now I was able to update my assembly, and this is real-time inventory. Okay, so if I am not going to build this one, I could just do build and new, and it'll save the update, and I can always go back to it. Right? If I've got something that I have built, I'm going to go back to this one here, and this one I was able to build 5, this example. So what happens behind the scenes to all of these items here and this finished good, right? Because I'm not going to have quantity or value of an assembly item if I am the one that manufactures it. It is not going to be available for me to record the invoice. And so I have to go through this build assembly process in order to get the quantity on hand for this 1000 MC item, and then I can sell it, right? And so as I go through this and I do the mark as final and build it, right? What happens behind the scenes in my general ledger is that all of my items that are listed here, the quantity and the value, and I can come over and customize just to add the quantity so we can see that per item, okay? So the quantity is removed at the item level and the value. And then what I see is that my finished good item, I have a quantity of 5, and now the value that will be sitting on my inventory valuation ready for me to invoice to my customer. Okay, I've got a question real fast. When you make the changes on real-time inventory, does it apply to that build or does it go to the next build? And even another question I get a lot is, does it update the item list? And this is a very, very, very good question. So when I go make my changes to this build, it is only for this build. It does not save it. It does not go back to the item list and update this bill of materials. The only time that this gets updated is when you come in and edit this. Okay. You can update this build assembly for real time, and it does not save or affect if we're not needing it to. Okay, so it does not go back and update that item list bill of materials. So great question. Okay, so the reason why this is important is because you could have an item that is on the P&L account, like the P&L chart of accounts, and you want those dollar amounts to be able to be added to our finished good item and inventory value and then sell. Sometimes we have where we want to be able to see the work in progress. We've got labor, we've got, direct and indirect. All of those things, even outsourced for painting or anodizing or any of those things, we can have a workflow where it is showing and I'm just going to go to the balance sheet here, right? But our inventory value can move from raw material to finished good. Obviously, in this sample file, we've sold way too much finished goods and we didn't build all the way. It's probably why all of this pending builds is sitting here. But you can see how it flows. Okay, if there's anything else that you would like to learn about, please let us know. And thank you so very much for your time today.